All right, Sunil Godse, welcome to the Happy Hustle podcast, my friend. We are live and ready to rock and roll, and I'm super stoked to connect.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this. And I'm really happy to try and educate your listeners on what this intangible thing called intuition is, but how vitally important it is to make sure that we don't waste time making bad decisions so that we make the right ones in whatever situation is that we face.
Love that. I mean, that is it's so well said, and I want to dive in to intuition in a nutshell and go deep down the rabbit hole, because I know you're the CEO and founder of Intuitionology.com. You're an expert on the matter. You teach all over the world, speaker, author, like you are the subject matter expert when it comes to intuition, and we all have intuition and we all need to know how to basically discover it and use it more effectively. But
Absolutely.
before we get into all that, I do want to ask you, Sunil, what is something interesting about yourself that not too many people know?
So, I mean, normally I like to start on a high note, but I think the whole catalyst of why I started Intuitionology was really kind of triggering the times when I ignored it. And one piece of information I really kept to myself for a long time, and it was actually somebody involved in the Intuitionology project early on that got me to start talking about this, was I was doing some coaching at the time when I was in engineering, and I had a friend reach out to me because she was being stalked. And there's something was telling me that I should be meeting with her that afternoon. I didn't have anything on my plate, but I completely dismissed it and said, let's meet a couple of days later. That same guy walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head. And I could have prevented that.
Whoa.
And that got me diving really deep into, okay, I never want to happen to this again to me.
Wow.
And I never want that to happen to anybody else again.
Wow. I mean, that is powerful, man. And I think we should just dive right in, because like the fact that you didn't listen to your intuition caused you then to create this whole company and this whole movement now that I mean, you said it's helped over 54,000 people alone with just your 7-day challenge,
Yeah.
not to mention all the other people who've read your books and follow you online and listen to your podcast. So I'm really excited to talk about this intuition movement that you've created. But
Yes.
before we do, let's talk about just like a definition of intuition first and
Yeah,
foremost.
and so here's where we're going to get a little bit difficult when it comes to definitions, and I'll get to the reason why. When I started looking deep into this, this is where I started. So, is there a definition of intuition? And I couldn't really find one that it really resonated with me. So I went online and I'm looking at, and so some people are saying it's voices from God, it's manifestation, it's something spiritual nature, and I understood that, but it didn't really resonate fully with me. And so I said, okay, that doesn't make sense. So I went on some online dictionaries and I really couldn't find anything that really resonated with me there. And so I'm thinking, okay. So now I'm thinking, okay, I remember these signals. Some things are signals that we're talking about intuition. And so there was this intuitive channeler that I remember in my circle of social media contacts that I remember seeing a post from her talking about signals and intuition. So I went and interviewed her. And so she was saying that, yes, there's these signals. It's an energetic property. And there's just no research in it. I mean, the research hasn't caught up, and we have all these old belief systems and all that. So I really like the energetic part, because I remembered my engineering days. Steel, for example, has both a mass-like property and an energetic-like property or wave-like property. So that I understood. And so there's this sort of art, and then I'd like to sort of call it the science. But if I'm looking at intuition from an art and science perspective, I've got the art part, but now this is where this person's saying there's no science in it. So I'm thinking, okay, well, who do I know that might give me some enlightenment on the science part? And then I found a neurologist, and I said, okay, let me go ask him. And so I take the camera. I went to the hospital he was at. He booked a boardroom, and I turned the camera on. I said, my question is, does intuition exist? And I was looking to be totally defeated and maybe grabbing a latte on the back home saying, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right. And the first thing he says is, it absolutely does. And the science proves it with the gut, and correlates, can't prove. And he's talking about the neurons and going to the gut area. He uses it for his patients, and he's saying that neuroscience research more than ever is actually showing that intuition affects us much earlier than we're actually consciously able to think about it. And so I'm thinking, wow, okay, so now there is research. And so now the next step for me is let's go onto an online database of academic research and see what happens. And so I type in intuition, and I'm, kind of nervously waiting. And next thing you know, tens of thousands of articles on this thing. And here's why I couldn't find a definition. The reason is that one research article showed that your intuition actually hits the amygdala. That's the primitive part of your brain. There is no language around that. And so what happens is we put a language around that. And so that makes sense. It's not what other people's definition should be. It's what my definition is and what matters to me. And so if for my podcast series, one of the first questions I ask is, what is your definition of intuition? And there's some common things around I feel, but even those feelings are unique. It's a common term like feeling, but what do you feel? And we'll dive into that specifically. But they all describe it very differently, which makes sense. It's basically what they think it is. And so that's one of the reasons why. And then I had heard it when I was 5 years old. When I was 5 years old, I remember distinctly I had these video games I wanted to buy, and my dad was saying, you can't afford them. And so I remember this voice saying that go door to door to raise money. And I did. I raised $200. $100 went to my dad, lots of milk and cookies, and the other $100 went to charity. And so now my premise was, okay, if I've heard that,
what about the video games?
No, I got that.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, I got those. Thank goodness.
All right.
And then my dad didn't like me bothering people, so I couldn't sit down for about 10 minutes. You can connect the dots as to what happened after I came home with the money.
The board of education.
Yes. 5-finger discount there, but but certainly, I mean, that didn't stop me from being intuitive. But so I remember, so if it was at 5 years old, then I must be born with it. And lo and behold, some research has shown that infants as young as 2 months old have shown to have intuitive tendencies, or they call it intuitive physics. And so there's that. And then I remember the neurologist saying, well, it's becoming more and more earlier than we think, than we're consciously aware of it. And so at that time, research was showing that intuition actually hits your brain 7 to 10 seconds on average before we actually take an action or make a decision. So now that makes sense. And so now I've got all these pieces of science, and now I've got the art and the science part. And so now I'm okay with something that resonates with me. And so now there's that sort of definition. And so if we take a look at the signals, as I call it, and we break them down, because the signals are a lot more complicated than we think. And so these signals are both positive and negative in nature. So clearly the positive ones are the ones that tell you what decision is to make. And so this is where you feel like you're doing the right thing. And so for me, it's like the dots connecting, or feeling like, things are just opening up, or kind of almost like a flow state for me.
Yeah.
It's just an opening. It just makes sense. There's one CEO that actually sees an omen. And so he sees this thing. There's no shape, there's no color, there's no real sort of quote unquote personality. It just comes up. And so whatever he's doing, if he's hiring someone or meeting with a vendor or bringing on a partner, this omen comes up, and then he just says yes to whatever he's doing, because that's sort of confirmatory for him. So that's how unique it can get. And then there's the other side is the negative signals. And what's important to note about the negative signals is that they actually start very subtle in nature. And these are the ones that we really miss. These are the whispers, or and we've all had this feeling where we walk into a room or we meet somebody that's kind of odd, and we just kind of like, there's something wrong here. And it's always like, it's always that, and it's like, it's that subtle. And because it's so subtle, we miss it. And so what happens is when you're,
or we ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's times where we ignore it, and we can talk about what we call the 4 intuitive hurdles of why we ignore it, and the reasons why we ignore it. And we were talking just before about, not trusting ourselves. We'll dive into that a little bit later. So when we miss these initial signals, and when your intuition knows you've missed it, it's going to send you another signal that's louder and louder. And it sometimes changes until it taps you on the shoulder and says, listen, buddy, I'm talking to you. You better pay attention.
Yeah.
And so in those situations, you what you really need to do is pay attention to what those. So for me, it is that anxiousness, or sometimes the hairs in the back of my neck, not from fear from, saber-toothed tigers is going to eat me. It's a different type of fear. And
Hmm.
it's just saying something's off. And a lot of times my eyebrows will cross.
Hmm.
Because it's just an automatic reaction for me. And when I can catch myself consciously doing that, I know that there's a signal that's saying something's off about the decision I'm about to make. Um, and so some of the common ones I've given you, but there's some odd ones. Like I had one entrepreneur that I interviewed, and he had no clue what the signals are because he's never been asked that.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm not sure, Sunil, but let's keep talking." And so I asked him about the failures he had in the ventures he went into for the wrong reasons, for money, fame. It
Yep.
was just not a right fit. And so every time he's recounting one of these ventures, he's grabbing his left earlobe. And then
Huh.
about 10 minutes in, he goes, "Oh my God, I just realized my left earlobe gets hot." And
Huh.
now when he looks back, when he gets into the ventures, he remembers his left earlobe getting hot. When he's talking to his wife about these ventures after complaining that, it went sideways or his partner's not
Yeah. Yeah.
behaving, is grabbing his left earlobe. And so this is, again, how unique it is to each one of us. And if you think about it, if we're born with intuition, we're putting all these experiences around us in the subconscious area of your brain, like a library, and your intuition is sort of the 90% underwater and 10% above water, if you think of it like an iceberg. And so all these pieces of information are going in all the time to soak in all the experiences around you. And so the way that I look at intuition is it's like driving a car. You have these signals. You got the signals, which are the sort of the whir of the engine, so to speak. So when
Hmm.
you push the button or turn the keys, you hear the engine and you simply drive. You don't
Mm.
necessarily need to open up the hood to find out how complicated it is.
Hmm.
But I'm such a nerdy engineer, past engineer dude. And the reason why I ignored my intuition to go into engineering, because it's doctor, lawyer, engineer, failure. Those are the four
Yeah.
East Indian states you can get into.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
and I it was miserable. I didn't like it, and I ended up becoming an entrepreneur because of that.
Mm.
But I really need to figure out what's under the hood. And
Okay.
so
Got
when I
it.
popped open the hood, there were these four types of intuition that all work together. And what it does is these four types work together, and then they send you the signals to let you know what it is. And the best way I can explain this, of how they work, is through a non-believer. So one of my first interviewees was the fellow by the name of John Rothschild, heavy into investment banking.
Mm.
And so I phoned him up and said, "Hey, listen, John, I'd like to interview you on intuition." Now, remember, the when you Googled intuition at that time, it was like, spiritual voices from God. And this guy, uses Excel spreadsheets like he runs his life, right?
Yeah.
So when you say it's voices from God, he's like, "Yeah, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah. Right.
But come down for an hour. We'll talk about intuition. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but at least we'll have a coffee. We'll catch up."
Hmm.
And so the cameras are on, and I tell him about the CEO that sees omens and all that. And he says, "Yeah, I'd like to shake the hand of that fellow who sees omens. But in life and business, it's all up to date and experience. It's just unfortunate. Like, there's intuition just is not a part of it." And then I said, "Okay, but John," and now we're getting to the four types of intuition. One of the four types is called experiential intuition. So as I was just explaining before, as to how you have these library of experiences,
Hmm.
when you're about to make a decision, that your intuition goes back into those library of experiences, and it's going to look at your education, both formal and
Hmm.
informal or street smarts, your learning, both formal and informal, your experiences, good and bad,
Yeah.
and the experiences of others. And so whatever is relevant to that decision, it's going to pluck those experiences like a library and inform you right away that that intuition is saying you can already make that decision because of these raw skills or experiences you've had in the past. And so he said, "Huh." And so then I said, sometimes your data, or you sometimes you make a decision that goes against the data. And he goes, "Well, I have an example for you." And I said, "Okay, John, what's the example?" So he was in the business of putting in franchise locations.
Gotcha.
And when you put in a franchise location like a Wendy's or McDonald's, what have you, in his company they used a benchmarking system, and so a 9 out of 10, or higher means that you put a franchise location there, and they're looking at things like demographics, traffic patterns,
Yep.
and overall development of that area as examples. Anything less, they would never think about putting one. And there was one sort of dilapidated area of Toronto, and his team had looked at this location. It was a 5.5 out of 10. So it wasn't even close to a decision to put something there. But him and his partner walk into that location, and this is the second of the two called situational intuition. And they're looking and saying, something feels like we should put it here. There's nothing around that tells them. I mean, it was like one of the downtrodden areas of Toronto. They're looking at putting in a higher upper scale beer pairings type of establishment.
Cool.
So nothing was really telling them they should. And he said, something's telling me that we should. And he's now using the language, perhaps it was my intuition, perhaps. But they did. And they put in that franchise location. That ended up being one of the best portfolio of franchises under their whole portfolio called the Beer Market. Yeah. Now he's getting it. Now we're talking about team members. We're talking about bringing on partners. So what I'm doing is I'm shining a light on his experiences, his intuition, how things go for him. And now he's self-convincing himself. And so there was now, and one of the things we were talking a little bit earlier is about when you don't trust yourself and the values that you have, and when you don't find your purpose. So when you have a purpose that changes, typically when you want to do that purpose or you want to live that purpose, you do it. And you know, this is exactly what you're doing. You're living your purpose out. Right. And
hope so.
Yeah. and
feels like it.
and you're like, you move from New York to where you are now, and the lifestyle that you have and the people you surround yourself is really to kind of live that purpose. And that's an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
For John, what his purpose is that he was so much on the sidelines of running a business that he wanted to actually own one. And he says, I'm tired of being an assistant coach. I want to be a coach. And so this is now where we're going to look at the third of the four called relational intuition.
So we got experiential. Let me just recap here. Experiential, situational, and now
we're getting to relational.
Relational. Okay.
And relational intuition looks at the people that you surround yourself with. And intuition does a really good filter at bringing in only those people who are going to support your purpose, and not yes people. These are people that will just support you. So his purpose was to shift away from being an investment banker. Everybody that was considered had like ego, fame, money, the lifestyle of high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines, security, all of those people who didn't care about what his purpose was saying, yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? What kind of a dumb decision are you making? The one person that he turned to that understood what his purpose was and would support him was his wife. And he looks at his wife, and now I'm quoting him. This just feels right. Now we've got a non-believer talking about an intuitive signal that he gets. And so the fourth of the four is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is ultimately responsible for you making that decision. If you're making a mundane decision, like what are we going to eat? I gotta turn left here. That you're pretty low on the creative intuitive side. It's just more kind of instinctual, as they say. But if you're going to make a decision that's really obtuse in nature, like John was about to make, that creative intuition is high. Now, you could also think he's going to pick a business. He's been 30 years of making probably $3-4 million a year, looking at successful businesses. You would think he'd pick a business that has great cash flow, fantastic revenues, and a strong balance sheet. No, he picks a tiny, almost bankrupt little restaurant.
Oh, geez.
That's what he wanted. That was where he thought his purpose would start. And so he made the decision. Intuition filtered all those people out that didn't matter, listens to his wife, rolls up his sleeve. That location, tiny bankrupt little restaurant, was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations. Whoa. And in the 20 years that he was finished, $2 billion a year in revenues. Whoa. All because it felt right.
Wow.
That's the power of intuition.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's really cool to hear that story and how intuition plays out. And I urge all the happy hustlers out there to think about right now their intuition and where, your intuition is actually leading you. Where is the signs showing up, both experiential, right?
Yeah.
Situational, relational, and creatively. Where is that intuition, showing up for you in your business, in your personal life, with your friends? Maybe you should get rid of some people in your inner circle. Maybe you should add some new ones.
Yep.
Maybe you should, start that podcast or write that book, or maybe you should, you know, pick up a new hobby, like, because you're intuitively feeling lack of balance. So you need to do something different, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I
and and
mean,
and, and stop being stuck.
yeah.
And we get stuck for just the, not no disrespect, but there's just
Hmm.
the reasons that are not innate to us. Like we talked about values and purpose. Like what do we want in life? We're looking
Yeah.
back at chasing things that we want to be better than. We want to be better than my parents. I want to be better than that person. And so
Yeah.
we start becoming, we start not looking at what we really want. We're looking at being reactive to what's
Hmm.
happened in the past, or we look to other things in the future. And if we don't have a strong sense of values that we have, what we really want, we start looking at, what does society want from me?
Yep.
What does that person want from me?
Yep.
What's my relationship with money? Because now money, if we have a healthy relationship with it, we do things from a really good internal perspective. But if our relationship with money is extrinsic in nature, then we're going to chase that Lamborghini on that house when it means absolutely nothing to us
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah.
And so when you
Society's just puts it on you, right?
absolutely, and so when
Yeah.
you don't have those strong values, that strong purpose, and it takes time and effort and work,
Yep.
but when you're that strong, that purpose starts unfolding. And I have this saying that I say, when you take care of the inputs guided by intuition, all the outputs get taken care of by themselves. So
Mm.
if it is financial freedom, that's great, as long as freedom doesn't necessarily mean something extrinsic in nature or egotistical. It's
Yeah.
really financial freedom for you. It means you can do the things that you want to. And this is where you need to really dig deep to figure out what are your values and relationships with things like money and your family and your friends, your
Mm.
career, and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
so this is some of the deep work that I do with my one-on-one clients, or even those at a group coaching level. These are the
Mm.
questions that I start getting them to work on. And
Yeah.
so usually at the end of the sessions, because there are multiple that we need, there's a clarity, and then they have a direction where they're going to go to.
Mm.
And when you don't have a strong sense of values or purpose, there's actually 4 intuitive hurdles that really squash you.
Mm. What are those? Let's get
And
into
so,
them.
the first one is, and because now you're at the amygdala, one is when you hijack that sort of the experiential intuition, the head and heart are balanced, and when they're not balanced, you become too emotional. And so, for example, in relationships, we get so emotionally attached, even though we kind of need to pull ourselves out, and it doesn't happen because we self-talk our way back into the relationship. And your intuition's already given second chances. This is not a second chance thing. This is not the third, fourth, fifth, sixth chance that you're ignoring. The other one is being way too rational. So again,
Oh, so what was
societal
the first
norms
one?
for being
For,
being too emotional.
too emotional. Okay.
Yeah. The second one is being too rational. That's completely on the opposite end.
Ah,
And so this
interesting.
is where you're really kind of listening to societal norms. What do you think you have to do?
Yep.
And it's not what you want to do. It's what you think you have to do for someone else or some other thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's being too rational,
Yep.
too process driven on the data logic. The third one is called ego.
Yep.
And there's 2 types of ego. Ego is, of course, the narcissism that you have. But the other side to that ego is also called following the herd. So if you
Mm.
look at your friendship circle, and you were talking about this earlier, how many friends do you have that you're allowing to be in your inner circle, or even your circle of friends, because they're wearing a brand name, because they have lattes in their hand, because
Yeah.
they know someone famous, or for whatever reason is not in line with yours. Now, it's okay to have friends on the fringe,
Yeah.
and that's fine. And certainly there's people like that, and I certainly enjoy their company. But when you look at the inner circle that
Mm-hmm.
truly understand what you want, and I'm sure you've met thousands of people. I've met thousands of people. I have 3.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. When you distill it down, you're right. Yeah. I mean, the people who are your ride or dies, who you actually like, don't need anything from, and they don't need anything from
Yeah.
you. You just enjoy their company. It's a
Yep.
very short list.
Very short, right? And so intuition is really good at giving you that filtration mechanism.
Mm.
And the last one is fear. And this is a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Fear. And so this is where we're really, and this is not the fear again that a saber-toothed tiger is coming to eat you. Remember, we're talking about the amygdala, the primitive part of the brain. All it knows is run, think, do, like.
Fight or
That's it.
flight.
Fight or flight, trust. That's it. One word. That's it. So when you are faced with a decision that your intuitive signal, positive, is telling you that it's the right one to make, we either fear change, we fear the unknown, or we fear failure. And we don't think we can do it. But remember that one of the 4 types is experiential intuition. Your intuition has already gone in the past experience that you've had and has already told you you have the raw skills that you can actually take the next step forward. It already knows that you can do it. You're the one holding yourself back. And so that's the big thing with fear. And so and the only way to tackle that fear is to just simply get up and take the next step and take the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the really great case studies I use is of David Dame. David Dame has had cerebral palsy all his life. And so he's been in a wheelchair, and his forever dream was to actually just stand on a beach and finally have the sand caress his toes and have the water. And so he got a chance. He went on vacation. His friends wheeled him up to the edge where the water meets the sand. And he stands up and he falls flat on his face. And fear came up, embarrassment. And so he said, at that exact moment, there are 2 things I could do, Sunil. The first is to succumb to fear and sit back in that wheelchair and forever regret the fact that I've never been able to walk into the ocean, a dream that I've wanted to have from a child. Or I can get up and I can simply battle the fear and take a step and take the next step and take the next step. And that's exactly what he did. And then what he did is he pointed to the neckline. He said, the water got about to here. And that's when he turned around. And when he turned around, he had never realized how far he had come. That's what happens when you trust your intuition. That's what happens when you battle fear. That's when you worry about taking the step, taking the next step, not worrying about the future. Forget about the future. The outputs will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Take the steps to get you to those goals. And when you do, you're actually doing it in the moment. You're trusting your signals to do that. You reach those goals. And that's when you look back and saying, wow, I did it.
Yeah. I love that. I think, just to recap those 4 hurdles, 1, you're too emotional.
Yeah.
2, you're too rational.
Yep.
3, the ego gets in the way. You're either, narcissistic or you're following the herd. And then 4, the fear, the change that you fear change or the unknown or failure.
Yeah.
And I think those hurdles block us all in their own time, in their own way. And I'm curious, Sunil, let me ask you this: for the happy hustlers out there right now who may be battling, let's just take the fear, hurdle right now. What is an action step that they could do to persevere past that fear?
Okay. So the first thing is I'm going to give a big dopamine hit of self-confidence, because the reason why they fear.
Please do. We love that.
Yeah. So fear comes up when people don't think that they can do something. They've got other people that don't believe in them, who you shouldn't give 2 hoots about. You've got other people you follow that have failed. That has nothing to do with you. You don't have your own self-confidence, which your intuition's already told you you've got confidence, because experiential intuition, again, is looking at the experience, the situation, the people, and saying, you can do this now. And this is where you have a positive intuitive signal. And so you can take that step. And so the first is the hit of self-confidence with a big breath and saying, yes, I have a positive intuitive signal. My intuition is saying I can do this. I don't care about what people think. I don't care about how dangerous I think it is, because I can't future cast. I'm just going to do it. And so the first piece of homework they need to do before they take the step is to go back and say, okay, what are the positive signals and what are the negative signals that I've had in my life? So you go to a good decision that you made, and the more important ones are the better ones, because that's when intuition is slightly louder, and say, okay, when I made that decision or when I made that career move, even though other people thought it was not the right one, what did it feel like? Right? So when I made the decision to leave engineering, I sacrificed my relationship with my dad. But when I went, and I was actually a part investor in a restaurant chain, and I remember that feeling of, oh, this is just amazing. These are and internal thoughts. Like it was just
Yeah.
open. It was just like it's like the road or the field just opened up, and I was
A
just
weight lifted.
a huge weight lifted. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of again, we're gonna put our own language around this. So
Mhm.
for me, my visuals, my feelings, that's what I felt. Others may say this is the dot connecting, or may just feel right, right? But that positive signal is what gives you that. And I'll give you a very good example of someone who was kind of talking the talk but wasn't walking the talk. A friend of mine, Hal Eisenberg, so he was in the mindset space, I was in the intuition space, and we had a great intersection. And so he didn't realize. I mean, everybody talks about I had this voice or I trust my intuition, and it becomes a nice theme on social media.
Yeah,
Always
right.
trust your gut. You trust your gut in any situation. Everybody puts that. Because of the research I know, I'm pretty sure they don't know what they're talking about.
You wrote the book on gut.
I've done.
Sunil. Let's be honest.
And so I said, yes, you're right, but it's a lot more complicated than that, which is fine. I mean, I love the overall themes because it still resonates with me. Obviously, I'm just going a little nerdy deeper into it. But he saw me talk in Toronto, and he said, "Wow, I didn't think intuition had signals, and I didn't think that there were 4 types of intuition." And so for him, it's like, wow, this is really complicated. And so we had so a year after he had seen me speak, and we communicated back and forth, he got this intuitive signal to go to the hospital. And of course, he just wasn't walking the talk, right? He was just talking it. And so he just, not sure what that is. And so dismissed it, completely dismissed it. That signal was telling him to go to the hospital for a reason, is because he contracted COVID-19. And he ended up fighting for his breath, literally. And he came to a life or death moment.
Whoa.
And he himself was suffering so badly. He, in that moment, wanted to die.
Wow.
And he said the moment of clarity, this is where his intuition was crystal clear. And he knew instantly there's these thoughts that came, you're not done. Your voice needs to be heard. Your work needs to carry on. Because he was doing some amazing things with the New York school system. He just wasn't doing it at 100%. He was doing it at 70, 60 because he wasn't trusting his intuition.
And I find that an important point that I want to circle back to, because I feel like a lot of people are doing just that.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. They're at half par or 3/4 par, and they don't want to fix the other 25, 30, 40%.
Yeah.
Which could just, and that explodes their success, internal success, not external, internal success.
Yep.
And then you attract the people around you that really care and that really matter. But he wasn't doing that. And so when he heard this voice, he saw this, it was crystal clear. And so when he came out of it, 5 days later, I was the first person he talked to at length about what had happened. And he was my very first podcast guest. And that launched my podcast series. And if there's ever intuition ever able to help someone, it's just to come pluck them out of the dangers of kind of falling into killing himself, literally wanting to die, to actually say, your work is not done. And since then, he's now reflected back and said, even though I said I'd do this, I wasn't really saying that. And he can reflect back and now know when his intuition was giving those signals and saying, I ignored it. Yeah, I told my team I'd do this, but I didn't. That's what we got to get rid of.
Yeah, for real. I mean, you raised such a great point. Like, first of all, I want to just recap like that action step. If you're struggling with fear right now and you're out there listening and you're a happy hustler who wants to achieve, greatness in their life, which we all do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to first give yourself the hit of dopamine and the self-confidence. We have to be our biggest fans. We have to manifest from the inside our desires, and we have to really, have the belief deep down that we can achieve it. So that's the first step. And then the next step is recalling a really important decision that you did make that actually panned out, positively, and realize that you have the intuitive power to overcome adversity, to push past the fear, and to do amazing things in your life.
Yeah.
Those are great steps.
Absolutely. And then with the positive signals, now you also have to switch to the negative signals.
Okay.
And so this is where you now to take a look. So the positive signals are great. When did you make a bad decision? And what did that feel like? And so this is where you have to be careful with the negative signals, because there's the subtle ones we were talking about that most people miss. If let's say you have a bad decision, you recognize this voice. I'm just putting it this voice and say, that's great. Now, if that voice was signal number one for that decision, that's great. You got the first signal. But if that voice was signal number three, that means you've missed the first two signals. And if you've missed those first two signals and they show up again, don't know that they're there. And so that's two bad decisions.
Mm.
Two bad decisions in any other situation could be the difference between just stubbing your toe or being headed for bankruptcy. You don't know. And so what you need to do is, if you get that voice, I'm just calling it a voice, or that gut feeling, or whatever that negative signal is, spend the time to figure out, was that triggered by another bad decision? And start walking that back. And the more time you spend with your positive and negative signals, then any decision you make is going to be either positive or a subtle negative signal. And when you've got that inventory nailed, every decision you make will be the right one in whatever situation, in any area of your life. And that's how you open up and that's how you open up the doors of opportunity. Yeah. And that's how you overcome fear. And that's when you find success.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically saying reverse engineer both positive and negative decisions.
Yes.
Identify the signals attached to both and use those identifying signals to make future decisions.
Absolutely. And you have to think about the process. The process is very, very important. And so one of the stories I often share is with Sarah Prout. Now, Sarah,
you're full of good stories, Sunil.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean, like, you got a story for every point. I love it. Like,
well, I've interviewed over 1,000 people.
I know, you're a pro.
And so I've got so many ways of showing this. But I've had one, Sarah Prout, who she was in an abusive marriage, 10 years, 40 instances of actual physical abuse. And the self-talk, no, second chances, the too emotional, all these, and she didn't trust herself. And so these hurdles are saying, wow, there's prey. She doesn't trust herself. I'm just gonna keep her there. And so it was a December 31st, I believe 2016, if I recall correctly. And so she goes outside and she looks to the stars and she gets a very clear signal to leave. Very clear. It was crystal clear. And she just, this was it. They had just finished fighting over whatever movie they were going to watch. He started to get agitated. She knew where that was headed. She just took a walk out, and the signal was crystal clear now. She walked out of that house, $30,000 in debt, no money, 2 kids, had to go on welfare, picking up furniture from the side of the roads, actually going into public washrooms to steal their soap, put it together so that they have some soap at home, eating beans and bread or beans and rice for days on end, but trusting those signals to open up one door after another, to find the light at the end of the tunnel. That light is intuition. It's always there. You just have to look up. And so eventually she meets the love of her life on Twitter. And over a year later, they end up getting married. And
Twitter. Curveball.
And 6.5 years later, not Bumble, no. And 6.5 years later, from the day that she left that person's, she is now running a multi-million-dollar business in manifestation. Now, the important story is not the money.
Fitting.
So don't focus on the money.
Yeah.
Because that's not that's the output. When you take care of the inputs, the outputs.
You're talking about the input.
And her personally being happy and personally helping others manifest things in their lives. That's the joy.
Yep.
And when you have that internal joy, then you become the internal rewards happen. And so for her, it just happened to be a very thriving business, becoming an author, online content, but affecting people. The $1 million comes, but it's about affecting people. Her purpose, her values are now stronger and centered. And those hurdles don't have a chance to come in. And they may peak. We're not robots, ups and downs or sideways, but more often than not, they're not going to affect her again because she can catch them earlier. Yeah.
Great point. I mean, you have to focus on controlling the input and the output will take care of itself. And
absolutely.
I mean, that's a great story articulating that vision and how clear it was. And I know we've all had clear signs out there that we've ignored in the past. And here Sunil and I are talking to give you permission to listen from here on out to your intuition and to actually act upon it, because it's that important. You know, it's the separation sometimes between life and death, between success and failure, you know, as you've outlined with some of these case studies. And I think it's that important. And I love that we're talking about it, you know, because I feel like it's almost like a little myth in the personal development, self-improvement space. Like, people talk about trusting their gut and, intuition. But here you are, you wrote the book on it, multiple, they got the courses on it, the expertise on it. And I love that, we're having the opportunity to really extract what it means in the 4 different types and the 4 different hurdles.
Yeah.
Now, Sunil, I do want to ask you, because I ask all my guests this, and I'm just honestly curious.
Yeah.
What was your first hustle? The first thing you did for money?
So that was at 5 years old.
Okay.
This is where I went, and I just listened to my intuition, and
Yeah.
it was $200. And I remember, distinctly going, and I knew I was going to get in trouble because I know what my dad was like. And he's the type of person, don't bother anybody. I'm the type of person is, if you don't ask, you won't know. And I just can remember, and I had my brother with me, and he was like 2.5. He's got the diapers going. And I said, "Come on, we want to get some video games." Yeah. Right? So and then we're knocking on these doors, and this lady comes in. They open up, and at that time, it was pretty okay to do this stuff. Nowadays, we're really fearful of doing that, right? Like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting anybody. Back then, we're talking about the 70s here. It was pretty open, right? And so I'm opening, and so you got these. There's a lot more seniors in that area that we were living, more retired folk. And see, I'm just raising money to get some video games. Oh, you're such a nice dear. Come in, and milk and cookies. And here's like, $5 or $20. And a couple of times here's a dime, of 25. But it didn't matter. It was just really kind of moving, chucking it up and up and up. And next thing you know, we got like this big, and they had these old jack-o'-lanterns because we kept the sort of the boxes from Halloween, like UNICEF boxes and all that. And I remember these jack-o'-lanterns we had from Halloween. And so we just took this jack-o'-lantern. We're just putting this money in. So we're swinging this jack-o'-lantern of bills and coins.
Nice.
And then eventually we got home and go to the basement. And then me and my brother are counting these things. And it says, okay. And then at that time, the games were, I think, $79.99. So we crossed that hurdle and goes, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, oh my God, there's just a lot more change left over. Right. And so I said, okay, let's have 50% for charity, 50% for my dad. And my dad comes in, what are you doing? I said, Dad, I got video games. Look, where'd you get that? I went door to door what did you do?
That's funny. Oh man. Hustling. We all have funny hustle stories. That's why I like to ask, because they're always hilarious. Let's talk about, this awesome 7-day challenge. Cause I really want to I want the happy hustlers to take action. I want them to actually start trusting their intuition. And I think you've done a phenomenal job. Like, I've actually been, in this 7-day challenge myself. Excellent. And it really is well done and is well set out in a systematic formula. Talk to us a little bit about the 7-day challenge and then where people can go to get it.
Absolutely. And so the 7-day challenge, you've got intuitionology.com/happy hustle /7-day challenge. So there's a link I think you'll put in the show notes that I've given just for your peeps. And so in that 7-day challenge, it's a very, very specific process that you have to go through. And the thing I do is I measure at the start and the end. I measure your percentage, your intuitive score at the start and the end. And I've had over 54,000 people through now. 100% of the time, their intuition has gotten stronger by measuring it. Before and after. So this thing absolutely works. And so what happens is you start with a problem that you choose. What problem have you worked that's really important to you that you've not been able to solve, and pick it. And what you do is you say, okay, what does it mean for you to solve? So is it going to shed something? Is it going to give you some gains? What does it really mean to you to solve this problem? And you note that. The first thing you start to do is what didn't work in the past? And so now you're going to look at your negative signals. And this is going to be important because the negative signals are the ones that are going to say, listen, if you're making the wrong decision, I'm going to tell you. And then you put yourself in an environment where you cut out the noise to really kind of let the positive signals come through and think about what steps are you going to take. And so when you did the first part where it was negative signals, if you put in a path that you think, or an action that you think you want to take, and it's the wrong one, now you know what your negative signals are. And so a negative signal is going to come say, not that one, because it's not the right one. And so now you can take that out of your plan to solve your problem. And then what you're left with are all the plan or action steps that you need that are already triggered by your positive signals of intuition saying, yep, that's right. Once you've got that, you look at who's going to help you solve that problem. Is it going to be someone? It could be a mentor. It could be your best friend. You have to be very careful. Don't get emotional. Don't force someone in that area, that group that you need to ask, because he or she's your best friend, or you emotionally think that you feel like, I want to feel important. I'm going through a 7-day challenge. I want that person to look at me. Yeah, I'm doing a 7-day challenge. You can get that sort of ego kind of going.
Yep.
It really has to be someone that's going to solve that problem for you.
Mm.
Then what environment that you have to put yourself in, if you have to change it, and then you just take action. And that's it. And in those, and I'm sure you've noticed, there's case studies with two people going through each one of those tasks. One is with John Harris, and John Harris, he actually used a 7-day challenge to sell his house. And the first day, there's a realtor that came through her card in his face and said, "You're only getting at 20,000 under. I've sold millions of houses. That's what you're getting." And before, he would say, he would push over. Okay. Yeah. Where's the contract? Except in the 7 days chat, he started realizing what his intuition was telling him. And at the end, he sold it for $50,000 over. So he made a $70,000 decision. So that's 10 grand a day. It's a great average.
Yeah. Hey.
And the second person I think is really important is Ashley Michelle. Ashley Michelle was a witness to a homicide. And so what had happened is her boyfriend had actually murdered their best friend. She walks into the apartment after the murder. He locks the door behind her and puts a knife to her back and says, "You're next." And her intuition just calms her down. The relation intuition is now watching him, calms him down. He assaults her. She breaks some blood vessels. He asks her to chokes her. He asks her to clean up the blood, which she refused. And there was a moment that her intuition said, "Now." And she ran, unlocked the doors, went down 18 flights of stairs, called 911, and obviously lived. She used the 7-day challenge to really kind of make sure that she can deal with the PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And it minimized. It didn't fix it, but in the 7 days, it really got her to go back to the gym to figure out, oh, this is the place I need to be. It got her to start trusting people again. And she is a huge fan of what's happening because she transformed her life just with those 7 days. And she's just like, her life has just been phenomenal after that in its own way. It's still a long process.
Yeah, for sure.
She's got these small wins that just get her to see the next day as something positive. And for her, that's a huge win.
Yeah. Well, and for everyone, like all the happy hustlers out there, you can really use this 7-day challenge in a multitude of ways. Like you said, whether it be for, selling your house, to making a business decision, to PTSD, to overcoming, self-limiting beliefs. And the best part is it's free, right?
Free.
I mean,
completely free.
Absolutely free. You guys click the link in the show notes or go to, intuitionology.com /happy hustle, right? And you get the hookup for free. Like
Absolutely.
There's nothing to lose, everything to gain. And I think that's so awesome, Sunil.
Yeah.
Sunil, let's dive into, I always like to ask multitude of questions regarding different disciplines. One being health, because I think it's very important to have an optimal body and mind in order to just succeed in any capacity.
Yeah.
What is the happy hustle hack, I like to call them, for your health that you use to, keep you in, great shape, both mentally and physically, that you could share with the happy hustlers?
Absolutely. So the first thing is to break bad habits. And so if we look back at the bad habits, why did we have these habits? Was it sort of emotional eating? What was around these things that really kind of got me to kind of break those bad habits? Because there's usually some kind of an emotional trigger or a piece of trauma or event that really kickstart that. And so if I look at even the ones that I interviewed that had bulimia or that had emotional eating disorders, it's always triggered by something in the past. And so I look at the past and say, okay, let's not fix that. Let's just, it happened. Great. It happened. Let's just change the narrative around how we describe it. And let's not attach some emotions to, let's just work ahead and go ahead.
Yeah.
So when I think like that, then what happens is I don't fall back over time. I don't fall back to that emotional upheaval that happens. And then I'm able to really kind of put in the good habits because I don't have the emotional baggage from the ones behind. Once you do that, then you can go to the gym and then you can kind of, take a walk or whatever. And remember, it's a process, right? Think at the present moment. Don't look at the scale and think you got to be 20 pounds lighter in 2 weeks. That future casting is not going to help. It's just every day doing, or every second day, whatever it is, just doing something. And then that's how you work yourself into a better health.
Love that. Let's talk about money. I love to ask, I'm sure you've made a bunch. I'm sure you've lost a bunch, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about a happy hustle hack that you use for
Yeah.
money.
It's down to the inputs versus the outputs. When I look at my relationship with my money, I spend things that's going to move my life forward, give me some enjoyment, but I don't overextend.
Gotcha.
And I'm looking at the simpler pleasures in life, not the overarching pleasures that are defined by other people. Very, very important. So whatever I want to do with my family and I can afford, I do. And so as I start to educate people, as I start to have my purpose in life, as I find out what I'm really good at, even in the jobs that I'm in or the careers I want to get into, I will get rewarded for that at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I love that you said you don't overextend, because I feel like a lot of people overextend themselves.
Yeah.
They live beyond their means, and that's a recipe for disaster and financial failure. So
Yes.
Definitely, love that point. Let's talk about entrepreneurship, a happy hustle hack that you used to help build your business and your life regarding entrepreneurship that you can share with the happy hustlers.
Find out why you're doing it. Find out what that purpose is, and when that purpose is strong, that shows up in the values that of your products and services. And what purpose are you helping solve for others? What value are you bringing to other people? That's what they're going to pay you for.
Yeah.
If you're going into digital marketing because it sounds great, I'll be able to sense that. My intuition is a two-way street. And I know you're just like everybody else. There's nothing that you add to my value. So why would I pay you for that? And so really be clear on why you're doing something, and that should come out in the marketing message that's genuine.
I love that. That's a great point. What about spirituality? Do you have a happy hustle hack regarding spirituality and tapping into a higher power?
That's a careful subject because everybody's got a sort of different bent on spirituality. So for me, I'm a Hindu, so I'm not a devout Hindu, but certainly I will respect that. There's values that we learn through the stories of Hinduism that I learned. My kids go to a place where they're learning those values, and so we inculcate those values and describe them as to how they imply the implications of that from a general sense. And so that's what I find really helps me. Other people see voices from God. Other people like to meditate. Again, it all depends upon how far you want to take it. So it's a bit of a touchy subject.
For sure. But the point is that you do something.
I do something for me, for sure. Yeah. There's some kind of inspirational power that comes that I believe that comes for sure.
Yeah, as do I. And I think it's just, you have to do something. You have to believe in a higher power, not one God or another. Sure. Whatever you believe in, we respect it. However, do something in that realm. And I think that's very valuable. This has been awesome, Sunil. I want to dive quickly into the rapid fire round where this is basically where I just ask you random questions and you answer honestly first thing that comes to mind. And then we'll wrap this bad boy up. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Favorite movie? Go.
Holy moly. Born Identity.
Oh, favorite food?
Butter chicken.
Favorite book?
Power versus Force.
Oh,
by David Hawkins.
Spirit animal? Yeah, I tried that. It's a heady book.
Wow, spirit animal. I know my favorite animal is a cheetah. I don't know if that's a spirit animal. I've never thought about a spirit animal.
So
wow. The only thing that comes to mind is owl, hawk. I don't know if those are spirit animals, but just soaring.
Yeah, of course they are.
They're high. They're just like there's expansive. And they just have this level of confidence that unmatched.
And owl's a really good one. I like that. And a hawk too.
Yeah.
Best business advice?
Always trust your intuition.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Favorite cliche saying?
Wow, it's gonna be my own, that's kind of cheesy.
It could be that.
Oh yeah, when you take care of the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves. 100%.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To continually live and be immortal, to affect as many people as I can.
Love that. One word you wish to be synonymous with your name for the rest of your life?
Intuition, hands down.
I have a feeling I know what this is going to be, but if you had a billboard and this was the last message that you could ever put out to the world, what would that billboard say?
Always trust the signals that are guiding you in the right direction. It's always right.
Love that. And 3 things you're most grateful for?
My kids, my wife, and my friends.
Love it. Sunil, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge you, man. This has been
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you again for sharing your love, your light, your wisdom, your intuition with the happy hustlers out there. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.
Talk to us where people can go to learn more about you. I know you have the Intuitionology podcast, which I was a recent guest on,
Yep.
and it's a great podcast. You guys could check that out there, but give us some other links where people can go learn more about you. And obviously there's the 7-day challenge, which we'll link up as well, but some other links where people can learn more
absolutely.
about you
So you can go any of the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm there. Soon I'll be entering the TikTok world with some nice advice there. And intuitionology.com, and you can DM me. Happy to answer any questions. But yeah, and of course you got my podcast series on iTunes, Shopify, Deezer, Google Podcasts. They're all over the place. So
awesome. Amazing. Check it out, guys. Intuitionology. And then you also have, sunilgodse.com, which is,
sunilgodse.com. Yeah. That's the business
with
side.
the books too.
Yeah.
You could get, some of his amazing books.
Yes, absolutely.
I highly recommend definitely checking out the podcast and that 7-day challenge though, guys. I mean, you have seriously nothing to lose and everything to gain. So check that out. Any final thoughts before I ask you the final question?
Nope. Let's fire it away.
What does happy hustling mean to you, Sunil?
Happy hustling means getting up every single day and doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Is just giving the education to others so that they have this gift in their hands called intuition, so that they can lead successful lives. And that's my purpose.
Love that. Mic drop. Amazing. Sunil Godse, everyone. Appreciate you, brother. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. Peace and love.